Mark Zuckerberg consuming all the headline space recently, and that's lucky for Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, who just revealed his terrifying vision of this country's future. Last week, Dorsey shared an article he called, quote, a great read. The article was published on Medium. It says that there is no bipartisan future for this country. One side must win and totally destroy the other. The piece describes a country as in a state of nonviolent civil war now, and the only way forward, it says, is to do what California has done. And the piece is pretty explicit about that. Import a new voter base until elections are mere formalities, as they are in California. End all debate. Allow only the left to speak. In other words, make America a lot more like Twitter, a one-party state where armies of serfs happily serve tech gods like, well, Jack Dorsey. That's the future they're all hoping for, and now you know. You'll notice we didn't have anything about sex-crazed pandas tonight, but we're on that because we're journalists, so stay tuned in the rest of the week for developments. That's it for us. In New York, right now, Sean Hannity is standing by. Here he is.
All right, Tucker. Great show as always. And welcome to Hannity. We're covering several major breaking stories tonight. We have new information about Robert Mueller's never-ending partisan witch hunt and the so-called investigation into Russia collusion. It has now officially moved beyond its mandate into a political takedown of the president you elected, and it seems by any means necessary. Now, in just a minute, we will uncover the shocking, unfair, two-tier justice system in this country, and we'll show you just how abusively biased and corrupt Mueller and his team of investigators are, and that they have now declared an all-out political war against this president. And also tonight, the media is spinning out of control following the FBI's raid on Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, will explain. And we're also tonight, we are closely monitoring the situation in Syria following, of course, this weekend's horrific gas attacks on men, women, and children. Now, this could prompt a U.S. retaliation against President Assad and his dictatorial regime at any moment. But first, we start with a very important opening news. All right, it has now been officially 328 days since the special counsel Robert Mueller was appointed to investigate so-called Russian interference into our elections. All right, tonight we're still asking the question, where is any evidence of collusion? Show us. Nothing so far, not a whiff, nothing, no evidence. Now, instead of concrete facts, information surrounding Russia's illicit actions, we now have in this country what is a runaway investigation. It's spinning out of control. It's led by Mueller and his merry band of Trump-hating deep state sycophants. That's just a fact. Now, we have gone from the prosecution of Paul Manafort over years-old payments from Ukraine, not Russia, to now an investigation into alleged affairs between Trump and a porn star named Stormy Daniels. You can't make this up. And now today we're learning from reports that FBI agents during the Cohen raid, they're actually looking for information about payments made to a former Playboy playmate, Karen McDougal. Does anyone actually believe that a porn star and a former Playboy playmate, that they're going to shed any light on potential collusion with Russia? The answer is of course not. Robert Mueller is now officially gone rogue and declared war against the president. And big news tonight, according to reports, Stormy Daniels, CNN will be so proud, they're now cooperating with Robert Mueller and his probe. Now, of course, this rogue activity from Mueller, it's nothing new. Remember back in March, former Trump political advisor Sam Nunberg, he said Mueller was seeking information regarding Michael Cohen's payments, yep, you got it, to Stormy Daniels. So much for Russian interference.
Did Mueller's folks ask anything that related to these issues around payments to people or women?
Well, look, they asked if I had ever heard anything about that, and my answer is I never have. I don't know anything about it, and I wouldn't have known anything about it.
All right, so sadly, tonight what's happening is Mueller's runaway train of an investigation is something we have now been warning you about for over a year. I've told you there are 5 forces actively working against Donald Trump. They have from the beginning. It is your corrupt media, the corrupt Democratic Party that doesn't care about the American people, weak establishment Republicans, never Trumpers. They want to be proven right, and what we describe as the deep state. And tonight you have 2 of those 5 forces working together to malign the president you elected. Now, we did some digging today, and what did we find? There's a lot of reports you've been hearing about the inner workings of the Mueller investigation. They include a lot of anonymous sources. In fact, some of these reports are totally based on anonymous sourcing. So who are all these anonymous people feeding all this information to their friends in the liberal media? Now, could it be that Mueller's team is actually coordinating with the liberal media, these outlets, to turn public opinion against President Trump? That helps their case. Now, maybe Mueller's office and their emails, maybe they'll get raided in pre-dawn hours. Maybe we'll see that happen. Now, clearly, the corrupt media and Mueller, knowing there's no collusion, there's no evidence of collusion. If they had it, we would know it by now. They're hoping that President Trump actually fires Mueller. And without a doubt, like Sarah Sanders said today, the president does have actually the legal right to fire Mueller. But we know if the president does, imagine the political outcry, what it would be like. It would be massive. In fact, this is likely exactly what many in these five forces I talk about want, because they believe it would spark, the humiliating end of the Trump presidency that we, the people, voted for. After all, that's been their goal from the get-go. We've always known that. And in their minds, this would set President Trump up to be impeached. And the sad truth tonight is while Mueller is on this witch hunt fishing expedition, it is abundantly clear that if Trump fires Mueller, sadly, nothing will go away. The truth is it'll only get worse. It'll only get louder. We'll only become more divided. Nothing will get done in the country. It doesn't matter, it appears, how rogue Robert Mueller is. Doesn't matter what he did with Whitey Bulger in Boston and 4 innocent people that went to jail. 2 died in jail because an FBI informant in his office that was working with Mueller and his team. And then after 2 died, there was over $100 million paid out in that case. It doesn't seem to matter to anybody in the liberal media that Mueller's pit bull, as described by the New York Times, Andrew Weissman, that he was involved in tens of thousands of people losing their jobs, their careers at Arthur Andersen Accounting. Doesn't matter at all. Doesn't matter. The Supreme Court overturned Weissman, Mueller's pit bull, 9-0. How often does that happen? It doesn't matter that 4 Merrill executives went to jail for a year because of Weissman and that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned their convictions. And it doesn't seem to matter that courts have excoriated Mueller's pit bull Weissman for withholding exculpatory evidence. And it doesn't matter that Mueller's team almost exclusively donated money to Obama, to Hillary, and to the DNC. After all, why would Robert Mueller hire a guy like Andrew Weissman with that atrocious track record? Why was he ever appointed? The answer is it was a fishing expedition, and it was an effort to get Trump from the beginning. So now we're stuck with a never-ending, what seems to be out-of-control investigation. The great one, Mark Levin, he's had it. He's now calling for the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, to be held accountable. Without his recusal, we wouldn't be here. That's just a fact. Take a listen.
I want to make a point here, not intended to be provocative or controversial, and it will destroy a 30-year friendship. It'll destroy it. But I really do think it's time for the Attorney General to step aside. The buck stops on the Attorney General's desk. Even if he recused himself as he did on the Russia matter, this is not the Russia matter.
Don't we save raids for, let's say, drug dealers and criminals and, organized crime and potential terrorists? Apparently not. So without a doubt, Sessions' recusal, the appointment of the now rogue special counsel by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who's out of control himself and conflicted out of this case, why he didn't have to recuse is another question. It just is a clear example of what I've been warning about, a 2-tiered justice system in this country. Now, the president's longtime personal attorney, Michael Cohen, had his home, his hotel, and, of course, his office raided by the FBI, over $130,000 payment as the personal attorney of Donald Trump to Stormy Daniels. And what people are not understanding here is when the special counsel raids the offices of the president's private attorney, Mueller is now basically backdoored his way into every single Trump business deal, at least since Michael Cohen has worked with Donald Trump. Want to take bets on what Mueller and Weissman are looking for? Because I have a pretty good idea tonight. Now, this is an unprecedented abuse of power. It needs to be countered, and countered immediately. The president should add to his team of top-notch lawyers, a communications team, top-notch communication skills, and frankly, the president needs to immediately start advancing the truth about who Robert Mueller is, what his mandate was, how far beyond his mandate is, and about his entire team of Democratic donors. And frankly, any negotiations that were going on with the president talking to Robert Mueller, that should probably likely end if it hasn't already. And the president and his legal team should be preparing to take this all the way to the United States Supreme Court. That's where we are tonight. It's time to investigate the investigators, as we have been doing. We got to investigate his team of partisan witch hunters. They are trying to overturn a duly elected president. If you voted for Donald Trump, you better get buckled up, because this is going to be a rough ride. And by the way, they should probably remind people daily that it appears that there's no longer equal application of our laws in the United States. Let me give you a case in point. Just start with Hillary Clinton. Clearly, she is guilty. Incontrovertible evidence of multiple felonies, mishandling of classified information, destruction of obstruction of justice. And if you don't believe me, try deleting one day 33,000 subpoenaed emails, acid washing your hard drive with bleach bit, destroying your cell phones with hammers. And was her home raided? Was a lawyer's home raided? Not a chance. We have a two-tier justice system. What about fired FBI Director James Comey? What about Bruce and Nellie Orr? What about anti-Trump lovebirds Strucken Page? What about lying Susan Rice? What about Christopher Steele, the foreign national that Fusion GPS hired and funneled the money Hillary did through the law firm, and the foreign national got Russian lies to influence the American people in an election? What about who lied to the FISA court judges? Now you can see on the side of your screen, there really aren't any anti-Trump officials or entities who have been subject to any of these aggressive tactics. None. And we know Hillary Clinton did commit felonies. Now, how can the American people have faith in their justice system tonight? And according to a report from the New York Times, well, Mueller's investigating President Trump apparently did a 20-minute speech on Skype in the Ukraine for $150,000 from a Ukrainian national. Okay, good money if you can make it. Well, guess what? Well, there's no New York Times report that that same Ukrainian national gave the Clintons $13 million. No outrage, no coverage from the New York Times. And talk about hypocrisy. Well, you won't believe this. Today, the FBI, they actually notified Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton is on the show a lot, that it's going to take 3 long years to turn over requested communications between anti-Trump FBI agent Strucken Page. 3 years? Can you say two-tier justice system? Now, a notorious high-ranking Soviet official, he once said, "Show me the man, I'll find you the crime." It sounds familiar to Mueller's never-ending investigation way beyond his mandate. This concept is wholly un-American, and it's very dangerous to our system of justice. It's dangerous to the Constitution if you believe in the rule of law. So tonight I'm saying, okay, game on. If somebody hits you, it's time to fight back, and it needs to come to an end. All right, we have to turn our attention to the media tonight. And as you can imagine, the Destroy Trump media, they are salivating. They're so hopeful that their lying narrative will be covered up now by Stormy Daniels, now with the news regarding Michael Cohen. One particularly unhinged so-called journalist, her name is April Ryan, and literally has taken Trump hatred to a whole new level. Listen to what she asked Sarah Sanders earlier today at the White House briefing. You won't believe it.
With all of this turmoil, particularly this last week, has the president at any time thought about stepping down before or now?
No, and I think that's an absolutely ridiculous question.
It's not ridiculous.
I gave you 2 questions, April. We're moving on. Jordan, go ahead.
It's not ridiculous.
Really, April? Is that what the White House briefing? That's a real appropriate time to sort of push your inner political fantasies here? Now, I'm sure you're making probably your boss, fake news head Jeff Zucker, really proud of you and your job today. Now, we're going to bring you more outrageous examples of the media's hysteria later in the show. But first, we are tonight monitoring this situation that's going on and ongoing in Syria, as the president now is expected to respond with force to the recent gas attacks that we know took place there. We've seen the images. Now, make no mistake, President Trump is a man of his word. And is the United States supposed to stand by and watch Assad using chemical weapons on men, women, and children? Should that go unanswered? Now, sadly, the same could not be said for President Obama when he was on the world stage. Remember, he drew a line in the sand. You might have forgotten, because he did nothing.
We have communicated in no uncertain terms with every player in the region that that's a red line for us, and that there would be enormous consequences if we start seeing movement on the chemical weapons front or use of chemical weapons. That would change my calculations significantly.
And after Assad crossed that red line and continued to gas his own people, remember when the Obama administration, they struck a deal. John Kerry told us 100% of those chemical weapons were going to be removed from Syria. And then they declared diplomatic victory. You might remember.
We were able to find a solution that actually removed the chemical weapons that were known from Syria in a way that the use of force would never have accomplished.
Russia has been constructive in helping to remove 100% of the declared chemical weapons from Syria. In fact, that was an agreement we made months ago, and it never faltered, even during these moments of conflict.
People may criticize us for not having launched missiles against Assad after chemical weapons had been used, but keep in mind why we didn't. We didn't because they got rid of the chemical weapons. And that, in fact, was very important.
Wishful thinking or willful ignorance. Either way, even former Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, Madeleine Albright, well, was calling out Obama's Middle East failure. Take a look.
Donald Trump says this is Barack Obama's fault because the first time this happened, Barack Obama did not use military action against Assad's regime. Do you think he's right about that?
No, I don't. I mean, I do wish Barack Obama did put down a red line, and I personally wish that we had followed through on that.
Can America stand by as innocent men, women, and children are being gassed? What should happen? Now, of course, I'm not talking about in any way an invasion of any kind, but Assad, those weapons have to be removed. When America's promises are empty and its leaders are weak and ineffective like Obama, we see what happens. Chaos, death, destruction, and the world becomes less safe. We do have some good news tonight that you probably won't hear about in the mainstream media. Yeah, Donald Trump strikes again after weeks of tough talks and predictions that China's never going to negotiate on trade. Yeah, the president of China has now announced his country plans to significantly lower certain tariffs on automobiles, which is good for American workers, and that they'd be working towards preserving intellectual property rights of Americans, which is another good thing. Two key concessions that the Trump administration was seeking. Good news for American business, good news for our auto industry. And earlier today, the president reached out to the president of China on Twitter. He wrote, quote, "Very thankful for the president of China's kind words on tariffs and automobile barriers. Also his enlightenment on intellectual property and technology transfers. We will make great progress together." And also tonight, the Facebook CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, he was grilled on Capitol Hill today. He faced 44 senators, 2 different committees. We'll have more on that later in the show. But first, joining us now to react to our top story, Mueller's runaway investigation, Fox News contributors Jason Chaffetz, Sarah Carter, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. Greg, I'll start with you. You have referred to the seizing of Michael Cohen's attorneys as an affront to our legal system and our justice system.
And it shows just how unprincipled Robert Mueller and Rod Rosenstein are. You know, they knew it was outside the scope of the authority of the special counsel, so they gave it to somebody else to do their dirty work. I suspect this was an effort to provoke the president into doing something rash that would hurt himself. But he's too smart for that. He's not going to do that. But think about what's at risk here.
Well, it's a trap. Don't you think it's a trap in a lot of ways?
It's surely a trap, as is a trap of sitting down with Robert Mueller to answer questions. The president should never, under any circumstances, do that. Why answer questions about a non-crime called collusion? There's no evidence of it. And the firing of Comey, the president has a constitutional right to do that, and he should not be forced to answer questions about it. So, you know, Mueller is all about
that's going to be a showdown.
Traps.
That's now going to become, and I said they need to prepare to take this all the way to the Supreme Court.
Absolutely.
Congressman, let me go to you. And, you know, maybe we need a special prosecutor, and maybe he can work in conjunction with maybe the Southern District of New York, and maybe we can send him to the offices of the Department of Justice and the FBI that have been stonewalling and slow-walking 1.2 million documents and missing deadlines and subpoenas by Congress and only handing over 3,600 of the 1.2 million documents. Maybe we can get it that way. Maybe Robert Mueller can send a raid in for that.
It's absolutely embarrassing, this Department of Justice. They appointed this John Lausch, who's out of Chicago, to produce these documents. I saw an interview he did with Bret Baier where he said they're going to work to provide the relevant documents. The relevant documents are all of the documents. If you're produced a subpoena, you comply with all of it. It's not optional. You don't get to handpick
you're wrong.
this.
If
This
you're
is not the
issued a
deep
subpoena,
state.
Congressman, no, you delete them and you acid wash your hard drive. What are you talking about? That's what you do if they subpoena documents. You acid wash it.
The Inspector General, going back on Hillary Clinton, the Inspector General found classified information in a non-classified setting. And what did they do to Hillary Clinton? They gave her top aides and attorneys immunity. They played nice. They just let it sit there.
Yep.
And then when it's Donald Trump, yeah, they give him immunity. When it comes, though, to Donald Trump, no-knock raids, with 4 different sites, it's a totally complete different set of tactics.
All right, Sarah, go ahead. I was
going to tell you this. Well, just really quickly, the Inspector General requested all information on particular people involved in the Hillary Clinton investigation, which was from 2016 to 2017. Everything. He wanted all their texts, all their phone records, all their documentation on all their cases. So that became the 1.2 million loaded documents that he received. Of those, I've been told roughly 35 to 40,000 deal directly with the investigation. Now, what's been happening, and you are exactly right there, Jason, was that they had taken and redacted things that they should have never redacted. Remember with Rudy Contreras, the judge, they redacted other issues. There's a lot of issues right now going on in Congress. They're saying, why are you redacting things that are relevant? So I agree. Turn it over. Let Congress see it. If there's something that you cannot show, if it deals with a different case completely, then hold that back. But turn over everything to Congress.
Sean,
how is it possible,
Sarah,
Greg Jarrett?
This is a
go ahead.
It's a closed case with no grand jury. There is absolutely no reason that Congress shouldn't be able to see everything that the Inspector General is able to see on a closed case.
By the way, the person that doesn't want that to happen the most is Rod Rosenstein.
Exactly.
He appointed Mueller, who also would be witness A. All right, I want to ask Greg this question. How is it possible that we started off with Trump-Russia collusion and we ended up at Stormy Daniels and raiding the office of the attorney? Help me out here. I know you're a lawyer.
That's what's so incredibly confounding about this. Look, anybody can negotiate a contract. It's perfectly permissible to pay money to somebody to go away, crawl back into your hole, and that appears to be what happened. At worst, it's a campaign violation, which is almost always just a civil penalty. But think about this. Cohen was also an officer of the Trump organization. He had the power to act on his own, and it may be altogether true that the president knew nothing about it. If so, that's not a campaign violation. He's acting in the interests of the organization. So to me, this is a lot of nothing.
All right. Thank you all for being with us. We have so much ground to cover. When we come back, Rush Limbaugh's take on the idea of President Trump firing Robert Mueller. What does he think about that? Also, professor, legal attorney Alan Dershowitz, who met with the president, joins us next.
The revelation of this news is also designed to goad Trump into firing somebody. Firing Mueller was what they actually, I think, are seeking. They want Trump to do something after which they can go get him because they haven't found anything yet to get him.
That was Rush Limbaugh making a great point earlier today, saying the breathless hysteria media coverage of the Cohen FBI raid, that's all designed to provoke the president to fire Mueller. Here with reaction, the author of the bestseller Trumped Up, How the Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy, Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz is with us. So I read reports that you were at the White House today with the president. Can you share any details?
Well, it was a prearranged, pre-scheduled meeting with White House staffers regarding the ongoing peace process in the Middle East. I have advised every president since Bill Clinton on Israel, because obviously people know it's a passion with me, and trying to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict is something I've been working on, writing about. I've written 6 books on the subject, and I was scheduled to meet with staff members in the White House for a period of time, and that was the primary focus of the meeting. It was very nice. Then I was invited to have dinner with the president and a few other people, and we discussed the Middle East and a range of subjects, right?
Well, it's a subject we also agree on, by the way, and we have for many, many years. And we made a lot of progress, by the way, with this president doing things that no other president has done, which you got to give him so much credit for.
Absolutely.
We got a lot of commentary on your appearance last night, and you've even taken it a step further, that this raid of the president's private attorney in his office, in his home, and as he was staying in a hotel, I guess because of construction, that you say violated constitutional rights, Professor.
Well, you can't just go and sweep up all lawyer-client privileged information and then give it over to some FBI agent or a low-ranking U.S. attorney and say, well, go through it. And the stuff that isn't privileged, turn over to the prosecutors. The stuff that is privileged, well, you can read it and you can study it, but you can't give it to prosecutors. The Fourth and Sixth Amendment don't just protect against use of evidence in a criminal trial. They protect privacy. Imagine if instead of going into lawyer-client privilege, they tape recorded a person's confession to his priest or rabbi, or went into somebody's home and recorded conversations with his wife, or conversations between a doctor and a patient. The lawyer-client privilege is as sacrosanct as that, and there has to be a very, very good reason before any prosecutor should have a right to look at any such material.
You said that where are America's civil libertarians on this? Because it is such a violation. I want to ask you this question because I think this is important. I thought Rush, I'll use his word, I thought it was right on target, that what we see the prosecutor doing here is because there's no evidence of collusion, they seem to be trying to goad the president. He does have the right to fire Mueller. That's established. But it seems like they want to precipitate some type of crisis because they found no Russia collusion.
Well, I don't believe the president will fire anybody. I think that what we're seeing is a bifurcation of the investigation. I think Mueller has now acknowledged that he doesn't have the authority to look into Mr. Donald Trump's pre-presidential activities, and so he's filtered that off and given that to the Southern District of New York, which is now going to investigate those aspects because apparently they couldn't find anything substantial when it comes to the president's exercise of his Article II authority. The president had the right to fire Comey. He had the right to determine what was to be investigated. He would have the right to pardon, though I don't think it would be a wise thing to do at this time. But they're now moving some of the case over to the Southern District to look into some other matters regarding his lawyer, his private activities, some negotiated settlements. That seems like a subterfuge by which Mueller doesn't have the authority, so he gives it to somebody else, gives them the information. It's like laundering information to another prosecutorial authority.
I mentioned this earlier. This, to me, seems like the greatest danger, and this is I think this is where the constitutional issue comes in terms of this is so far beyond, A, his mandate, B, by getting into the private records of the president's personal attorney. At that point, doesn't that backdoor Mueller, even though it's the Southern District of New York, right into every business deal, right into every private agreement that the president has ever made?
He's trying to have it both ways. He's trying to say, look, I'm not looking into this, but I'm just giving the material over to the Southern District for them to look into it. But the Southern District never would have gotten the material but for the fact that Mueller investigated and discovered some of this material. And, you know, it's a dangerous thing to start intruding into lawyers' offices. It will make it much harder for people to trust their lawyers, their doctors, their priests, their spouses, when people will say, look, even the president's most confidential communications with his lawyer can now be searched just based on probable cause, which is a very, very low standard. I think there'll be great distrust of relationships that are very important to American society, confidential relationships between a priest and a penitent and a doctor and a patient and a lawyer and a client. That's not a good day for democracy.
I think that's well said, Professor. Thank you. I know you've had a busy 24 hours. You were with us last night, up early this morning on Fox and Friends with the President. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, when we come back, President Trump could take military action against Syria at any moment. Ed Henry, he's live at the White House tonight. He'll have a full report. And what are the military options of the president? That's straight ahead as we continue. And we are awaiting a potential U.S. military response to the chemical weapons attack in Syria from over the weekend. It left at least 40 dead. Joining us live from the White House with the very latest on this and much more, Fox News Chief National Correspondent, our own Ed Henry. Ed, we heard the president would respond in 24 to 48 hours. And, well, we're coming up on that mark probably sometime tomorrow.
Well, that's right, Sean, coming up on that deadline. But they are being very careful here because they want to make sure that if there is military action, it's very carefully planned out, and they're keeping their cards close to the vest. You would expect that to happen because, remember, in the 2016 campaign, President Trump talked again and again about how he did not want to tip off the enemy in any military situation in terms of troop movements, potential military action. But we are certainly getting hints, at least, based on that deadline you mentioned the president sent, but also other comments and other things around here at the White House. For example, today the president had a phone call with the British Prime Minister Theresa May. You can see her there. This after a call with the French president before that. Key allies, obviously, and the statement the White House put out said that both leaders condemned what they called Syrian President Assad's, quote, vicious disregard for human life. The president and prime minister agreed not to allow the use of chemical weapons to continue, seeming to draw a line there. More tea leaves to read into the fact that Vice President Mike Pence is now being sent to Peru for the Summit of Americas this weekend because the president has now canceled his planned trip to Peru and Colombia. Likewise, Defense Secretary James Mattis pulling out of a weekend trip out west. He has publicly said the U.S. has not ruled out military action. Pentagon officials, meanwhile, calling out the Russian military for jamming some U.S. drones flying over Syria. The Pentagon says that they are using sufficient countermeasures to protect our manned and unmanned aircraft as those drones scout out possible U.S. strikes against the Assad regime, something talked about here at the White House and on the Hill.
The president's been clear. We're working with our partners and allies and our national security team to look at all options. And as we've said, all options are on the table, but I'm not going to get ahead of anything the president may or may not do in response to what's taking place in Syria.
There has to be robust reaction in action, not just words or rhetoric. The response has to have a military component against Bashar al-Assad, but it also has to send a message to his enablers. Syria is enabled by Iran and Russia.
Now, something to watch is that tomorrow the USS Harry Truman is headed to the Mediterranean on a pre-scheduled deployment. That will now put at least 7 U.S. warships with hundreds of cruise missiles in the region. Remember, last year the U.S. Navy launched 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Syria after another chemical attack. That was when we had 2 destroyers in the Mediterranean. Right now, there's far more firepower this time around. By the way, back here at home, I mentioned a moment ago that the U.S. military is pushing it back against Russian interference in Syria. Well, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg was testifying in the Senate for several hours. He apologized for Russian social media interference in the 2016 campaign. Watch.
We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry. I started Facebook, I run it, and I'm responsible for what happens here.
Now, Zuckerberg also said that Facebook is basically in what he called an arms race with Russia in terms of dealing with election interference ahead of the upcoming midterms and the 2020 election as well. He has more testimony to come tomorrow right here in Washington in the House. Sean?
All right, Ed Henry in Washington tonight. We appreciate your report. Joining us now is Green Beret, former counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Cheney. Florida congressional candidate Michael Waltz is with us, and also with us, retired CIA senior intelligence officer, Sonoran Policy Group Vice President Danielle Hoffman. Danielle, let's start with you. I think the most important thing, and you're the expert on Russia and all of this, is the president had talked about we're done in Syria. Then this happens. We know Assad has used chemical weapons in the past. I don't think America can stand idly by when men, women, and children are being gassed. The question is, was it Assad and his regime, or is it potentially the rebels in the civil war that want the United States to stay there?
Well, the line that it's the opposition launching these sorts of attacks as a pretext so that the United States would become involved, that's the Russian news media and its propaganda. The truth is that the Syrians have been launching
We know that
chemical
for sure. We would be able to tell the difference. We know Assad has them. Do the rebels have these weapons?
From my experience, it has been the Assad regime that has the capability to deliver the weapons. These are barrel bombs that you need helicopters and aircraft to deliver them. And the rebels don't have that capability. It's the Assad regime that has the chlorine and the sarin gas to launch these attacks, and they control the security for these areas. It's going to be very difficult to prove that any chemical weapons were used because Assad's own security guys are going to be shepherding around, according to the latest news reports, these representatives from the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons.
Michael Waltz, same question, sir.
Well, just to add to that point, Sean, we can track these aircraft. We tracked them last time. We know exactly what airbase they come from, and we know that this is the Assad regime. We also have the ability to intercept communications. But to your point, Sean, this president understands two things. One, inaction has consequences, and we are bearing now the consequences, and he's having to deal with the inaction of the last 8 years under President Obama that's allowed this problem to get this bad. And then number two, that diplomacy is actually benefited by the credible use of military force. Sometimes you actually have to employ that force, and in this case, I hope and expect to see Syrian pilots not have a single runway left after our standoff cruise missiles take them out. Enough is enough. We can parse out the attacks away from Russian assets, where they put very sophisticated Russian anti-defense missile systems, and take down Assad's Air Force once and for all.
All right, guys, we really appreciate it. We'll be watching, obviously, very, very closely. Still a busy news night tonight. When we come back, the media completely unhinged over the Michael Cohen raid. They're not listening to Alan Dershowitz and others. You won't believe the ridiculous, absurd conspiracy theories they're peddling now. We've got the details. That's straight ahead. Trump media has become totally unhinged over the raid over President Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, with some of them going so far as to question if Donald Trump can take action in Syria as a distraction, like the movie Wag the Dog, even though he had announced it before the raid. Take a look.
The news simply does not come much bigger than this. With President Trump weighing military action against Syria, the FBI takes action against his personal attorney, and President Trump lashes out big time.
I was at Barry Levinson last week. I've been reminded, he's the director of that film where a president in fiction decided to start a little war to cover up for hanky-panky. I remember Reagan a lot of people thought he started that little action down in Grenada to cover up for Beirut and loss of the Marine lives there.
Right.
It isn't so far-fetched.
We have a temperamentally unfit man who is now having to make decisions on what may be a decision that not only impacts the future of Syria, but the entire region.
The seriousness of the situation within the White House is interesting at this time. If he wants to do a wag the dog in Syria, let us be careful with the timing of this.
He had announced the threat of a potential reaction within 24, 48 hours before that had happened. Joining us now with reaction, NRA TV contributor and former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino, as well as the co-host of the Steele and Unger show, Sirius XM, POTUS. Rick Unger is with us. Obama, Drew, your friend Obama, the one you love so much, Rick. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
You've been a stranger. You've abandoned our program for whatever reason.
Man, I'm back.
No, you totally abandoned us.
I heard Bongino was here, so I had to come back.
Oh, yeah, of course, you come for Bongino.
Yeah.
But here's the point. Obama drew a red line in the sand, did nothing, and it's only emboldened Assad. Kerry announced to the world he's gotten rid of 100% of his chemical weapon arsenal. Not true.
No, absolutely not true. The red line resolution was supposed to involve the UN and Russia getting those weapons out of there. Clearly, that did not happen. You're right about Kerry. I can't argue with you. And even what President Trump did, which I supported, I will tell you, this last time around.
Did you get therapy since you've been here last? Did you go get help?
Let me get
what
to
has
the
happened
end.
to you?
Well, I just tell the truth. You should know that by now. Even what he did not apparently go far enough. I actually support the president doing something in Syria. We cannot sit by and let Assad do what he did to those poor people in that suburb outside of Damascus. However, all of that is not going to stop media, liberal or otherwise, from seeing a wag the dog scenario. I have a suggestion for the president. The Congress, the Senate, is looking at a new bill that they're going to introduce on Thursday to reset up the war powers. It's a Republican-sponsored bill. If I were the president, if I were the president in this situation, I would discuss this with the Congress.
Let me go to bad idea. He's the commander-in-chief.
And Congress has the power, according to the Constitution, to wage war.
They do, but every president, no president has listened to the War Powers Act. Dan.
They should. You're right.
Sean, the media, you have to understand, and I know you get this, but the audience needs to understand this as well. The media understands and sees everything with regard to their disdain for Trump through the Russian collusion lens. Everything. They've been gaslighting themselves, where they tell a lie over and over confidently, and they isolate themselves from the truth. So what they see here is they see this as a wag the dog effort, despite the obvious fact that Trump has been very harsh on the Russians. You know, he wiped out a bunch of Russian mercenaries over in Syria. He's been basically trying to bankrupt their natural gas market. He just sanctioned 7 Russian oligarchs with direct contact with Putin, Deripaska and Viktor Vekselberg included. I mean, they're just losing their minds, and their disdain for Trump is coloring them to the reality right in front of them. And it's really embarrassing them, not us.
Are you going to defend your liberal friends in the media, Rick, even though you're beginning to see the light a little bit?
You cannot blame them, Sean. It's unrealistic to think that they're not going to notice the possibilities here. This is why...
Didn't Trump announce 24 to 48 hours before we heard about the raid on Michael Cohen's office?
Yeah, but see, that's what's, yes, he did. But look at the what he announced the week before that. The week before that, the president says, I'm getting out of Syria. Then a couple of days after that, it's, well, maybe not so soon. And now he's going to send
24 to 48 hours before we ever heard that Michael Cohen, by the way, I wish we'd raid the DOJ and the FBI and grab their computers. Dan Bongino.
Rick, you got the timeline all messed up. You just acknowledged it. What? He said, yes, we may be getting out of Syria. Then the gas attack happened. And then the Cohen raid. It's Rick, listen, I know you're a smart guy.
First the warning, then the Cohen raid.
You've got the whole thing. Yeah, you've got the whole thing mixed up, Rick.
I don't think so. That's what I just said. He did say that before the gas attack. People like me were going, why are you getting out so soon? And why are you announcing it when you're the one who hates when everybody announces it?
Time out. But a serious question Sean just asked. I'd like the answer to. Then how come you just call out the media and say, all right, guys, this is obviously not a wag the dog scenario because the timeline does not marry up to that. It makes literally no sense.
I think it's unrealistic to expect that media is not going to see the possibilities here. I want them to do something. If it's the right thing.
It's irrational.
Both of you. Rick Unger, kind of welcome back. You're almost there. We need a little more time away. When we come back, Senator Ted Cruz absolutely grills Mark Zuckerberg over allegations of conservative censorship on Facebook. We'll play you the exchange. That's our video of the day.